In this video, you will learn how to both use and create hyphens and dashes. Hyphens and dashes are often confused, I think in part because of how we create them when we're using a keyboard. Many of us don't actually know how to create them properly, so we end up using hyphens when we mean to be using dashes. The functions of hyphens and dashes are very different. Hyphens are more of connectors. They create one word out of two. They allow you to connect a word across two lines of text. Dashes are more like separators. They set information off from the rest of the sentence, at least the long dash does. So it's really important that we are using the correct one, even though they look kind of the same, because their meanings are very different. We're going to start with hyphens and specifically how to make one, because I think this is, it's probably not the most important part, but if we're not making it correctly, even if we know what to do, it's not translating to our readers. Hyphens are the easiest of the three things to make because all you have to do is hit one key. This one, the minus key. You don't have to click shift, you just type it once and that's it. This is what I see people overusing. They mean to create dashes and they're really just using the hyphen. Hyphens are used primarily to connect words that break across lines of text. They're also used to create some compound words. When you're breaking across lines of text, and most of the time our word processing programs do this for us, or they don't allow us to break across lines of text, but it's good to know the rule just in case. When you need to separate a word across a line, you should only be breaking them where the syllables separate. So let's look at an example. It would be correct to say the girls were very excited about the upcoming sleepover and to hyphenate sleep and over. Not correct to break it in the middle of the word sleep because the syllable doesn't separate there. So it becomes confusing to readers, and that's really the reason for the rule, is making it as easy as possible for our readers to understand what we're trying to say. Some compound words are written as one word. Some are hyphenated, and some are written as two or more words. There aren't too many rules that govern how compound words are written. These spellings also change over time. So a good example is the word email. It used to be e-mail, but it's become such a commonly used word that the hyphen kind of disappeared as it became one word. I think basketball operated the same way. So your best bet when you're not sure is to use a current dictionary. Usually one of the online ones works well because those are going to be the most up-to-date to look up how the word is spelled, because these things do change. There are a few rules though that are pretty consistent. The first is that when you're using compound numbers from 21 to 99, so basically after 20 but before you get to 100, you use a hyphen. And then when you're using a fraction as a modifier, as an adjective. So let's look at some examples. There are 28 students in the class. A 2/3 majority voted to change the rule. Both of those take hyphens. But if we're going to say 2/3 of the students completed their homework, we don't use a hyphen because that's not an adjective. In this sentence, it's a noun. Currently, we also use a hyphen with the following prefixes: all, ex, great, and self, and with the suffixes elect and free, and with all prefixes that come before a proper noun or proper adjective. So here are some examples of what those look like. Note that with the proper nouns and adjectives, we do still capitalize the proper word. That doesn't change even though we've added a prefix. We also use a hyphen to create a compound adjective when it precedes the noun it modifies. This is basically taking two words and making it one word. The company was a well-oiled machine. So rather than well being the adverb modifying oiled the adjective, we're creating one word out of this. Same thing here. After school is really kind of the one word adjective to describe the job. However, if one of the modifiers is an adverb, we don't use a hyphen because now we do have two separate words. The beautifully sewn dress was very expensive. So sewn is the adjective modifying dress. Beautifully is telling us how it was sewn. Because those are still operating as two separate words, we don't use a hyphen. Dashes. Okay, this is another place where people get really confused. There are two types of dashes. One is called the N dash, and the other one is called the M dash. And they're so named because the N dash is the length of the letter N, in word processing, and the M dash is the length of the letter M. And they, again, serve very different functions. The N dash is kind of more of a connector, similar to a hyphen, but instead of creating one word, it's more used to represent a range or a span. That's why it's slightly longer than the hyphen, because it's not creating a word. So it can represent a span or range of numbers, dates, or time. There's no space between the N dash and the adjacent words. This is another thing that I see a lot that I would consider it to be incorrect, although it kind of depends on what style a publisher is using. So you will sometimes see spaces, at least with M dashes in certain publications, but for the most part, your best bet is to not put extra space around them. Then depending on the context, the N dash is read as to or through. So from 2019 through 2020, from 1 to 2 p.m. A little bit longer than a hyphen. The N dash is also used to represent scores or results of contests. So again, people often use a hyphen to show a score. You really should be using an N dash. And it can be used to connect words, between words that represent conflict, connection, or direction. So here is an example of that. The LIE runs east-west across Long Island. It's not creating one word east-west, it's showing a connection, or kind of, you can think of it as a range between these two places. To create an N dash on a Mac, you hold down Option, and then you click what would be the hyphen or the minus key at the same time, and an N dash is going to pop up. On a PC, hold down Alt, and then on the numeric keypad, it only works on the numeric keypad, you type 0, 1, 5, 0, and then an N dash is going to pop up. The M dash is really what most of us think of when we think of a dash. It's sometimes called the long dash, and this is the separator. It's used to set off words, phrases, and clauses from the rest of the sentence. They're similar to parentheses, but the effect with dashes is to emphasize rather than de-emphasize. So let's take a look at our three options for what we would call parenthetical information. Parentheses we can use to offset information, but those tend to de-emphasize. They're a signal to the reader that you can skip or skim over the information within. We also use commas to set off additional information from a sentence. Commas have a neutral emphasis. They help us process the sentence to read the offset information as offset information, but they signal that the information inside the commas is neither more nor less important than the rest of the sentence. Then the long dashes tend to emphasize the offset information. They're a little dramatic. Sometimes I think of them as arrows, like pointing to the offset information because of the long lines. They create a sharper separation visually, which is what leads to the effective emphasis. So here are a few examples. And you can probably hear, if you read them out loud, that because the visual of the dash creates a slightly longer pause because it creates that sharper separation, there really is a more dramatic emphasis to the information that's offset, which is one of the reasons that we don't want to use dashes too much. We want to save them for those times that we really want to emphasize or create a dramatic pause. If we're using them too often, then that effect gets lost and we're just seeing a bunch of lines on a page and it becomes overwhelming for readers to process. To create an M dash on a Mac, you're going to hold down Option, Shift, and the hyphen or minus key at the same time. You hold those three down and a long dash pops up when you're using a Mac keyboard. When you're using a PC, we're once again using Alt and the numeric keypad, but this time our code is 0, 1, 5, 1. It's very similar to the N dash, so these might be, I recommend writing these down, and anytime you're not sure, looking them up until you commit to memory. If you just Google M-PC or N-PC, you're going to get the shortcut posted for you. Because again, using the wrong one isn't just a matter of it being incorrect, it miscommunicates to readers, and the whole point when we're writing is to communicate our ideas clearly. So we have to make sure we're using the right punctuation. So here is some practice. Determine whether the sentences below need a hyphen, an N dash, or an M dash. This is where you pause the video, complete the practice, and then restart it to hear the answers. Number 1, our baseball team finished the season with a 6-10 record. Here, we're going to use an N dash to show the result of a sporting event or contest. Number 2, upon seeing the damage, her whole basement was flooded. She hung her head and cried. So, we could use parentheses here, but that would de-emphasize. We could use commas, but the commas don't work as well here, in part because the offset information is a complete sentence itself. So the commas are actually kind of confusing. Our best bet is to put a long dash around the entire offset sentence. Upon seeing the damage, her whole basement was flooded. She hung her head and cried. Number 3, he was sorry to learn that his ex-girlfriend was in all of his classes this year. Prefix X, we need to hyphenate. Number 4, I am writing a research paper about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is, well, not exactly a range. Remember that we use the N dash to connect two words that are part of a conflict. And 5, I received the best birthday gift, a snow day. Again, we could use a comma, we could use parentheses, but we're practicing with dashes. This would be the M dash or the long dash because it's information that you're separating from the rest of the sentence rather than connecting.